Welcome to our SUSECon session running SAP Data Intelligence using SUSE Kubernetes Stack. In this session, we will have the following agenda. We start with a short introduction. We will talk about what is SUSE Kubernetes Stack. Then we will talk about what is SAP Data Intelligence. Then we bring them both together. And finally, we will talk about the requirements and how to install SAP Data Intelligence on SUSE's Kubernetes Stack. First, let me introduce the speakers of today, which are Kevin Klinger and me, Uli Scheirer. We do both work as sub-solution architects for SUSE at the SAP Linux Lab. So let me talk shortly about the SAP Linux Lab. The SAP Linux Lab was founded in 1999 by SAP and hard and software vendors, amongst them SUSE. The SAP Linux Lab is a unique place where interdisciplinary teams formed from employees of SAP and hard and software vendors working together on innovation projects, giving development support and third-level support to customers. Our mission is to make Linux the #1 platform for SAP workloads. So, what is SUSE's Kubernetes Stack? The SUSE Kubernetes Stack consists of the Rancher Kubernetes engine distribution, the Rancher Kubernetes management, the Harvester hyperconverged infrastructure, and for security topics, Neuvector. The Rancher Kubernetes engine RKE is a full upstream Kubernetes distribution, which is of course CNCF certified. It is infrastructure agnostic, meaning it can be installed on any cloud provider or on-prem or in virtualized environments. It's fully containerized and supports all major Linux distributions. It's got features for backup and disaster recovery and is designed as well for air-gapped network environments. The Rancher UI Management UI is a Kubernetes management tool to deploy and run clusters anywhere and on any provider. Rancher can provision Kubernetes from a hosted provider, provision compute nodes and then install Kubernetes on them, or import existing Kubernetes clusters running anywhere. Rancher helps in managing Kubernetes clusters by centralizing authentication and role-based access control for all of the clusters, giving global admins the ability to control cluster access from one location. It enables detailed monitoring and alerting for clusters and their resources, and integrates directly with Helm via the application catalog. Rancher includes Fleet to help you to automatically deploy and upgrade workloads. Rancher is a complete container management platform for Kubernetes, giving you the tools to successfully run Kubernetes anywhere. Harvester is a modern, open, interoperable, hyperconverged infrastructure solution built on Kubernetes. It's an open source alternative designed for operators seeking a cloud-native HCI solution. Harvester runs on bare metal servers and provides integrated virtualization and distributed storage capabilities. In addition to traditional virtual machine management, Harvester supports containerized environments automatically through the integration with Rancher. It offers a solution that unifies legacy virtualized infrastructures while enabling the adoption of containers from core to edge locations. Finally, Neuvector is the only Kubernetes native container security platform that delivers complete container security. Our end-to-end vulnerability management gives you a continuous risk profile on known threats. Our patented container firewall technology starts blocking on day one to protect your infrastructure from known and unknown threats. Our behavioral learning and security as code automation processes improve the flow between development and security. Integration policy helps to prevent future exposure. Now let's talk about what is SAP Data in SAP Data Intelligence. SAP Data Intelligence is a comprehensive data management solution. As the data orchestration layer of SAP's business technology platform, it transforms distributed data sprawls into vital data insights, delivering innovation at scale. You can consider SAP Data Intelligence as kind of air traffic control for your data. As SAP Data Intelligence has connectors from many different data sources, databases, SAP applications, data lakes, etc., SAP Data Intelligence helps you in data discovery, collecting data from various sources by detecting patterns, data profiling, metadata cataloging, data ingestion, data processing, and data enrichment. So you can get the most value out of your business data. Now to bring things together, SAP Data Intelligence and Rancher Kubernetes engine. As all the services like the tenant apps in SAP Data Intelligence are running containerized, it can be deployed on top of RKE, using Longhorn as storage for persisting data. Other components like the internal HANA database, the diagnostic stack, and the SAP DI systems management run as containers on RKE as well. For a fully functional SAP Data Intelligence deployment, an external private Docker registry is needed. Here, the installation images are stored as well as the container images created by the applications like the pipeline modeler in SAP Data Intelligence. Finally, I will give you a short overview of a compatibility matrix. So SAP Data Intelligence version versus RKE version and validation state is depicted in this matrix. The most current version is at the moment SAP Data Intelligence 3.3, which is running and on RKE version 2 and is validated with Longhorn, NetApp Trident, NetApp Storage Grid as storage providers for persisting the data. And with this, I will hand over to my colleague, Kevin Klinger, who will talk about requirements and installation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And now let's talk about the requirements and how to install SAP Data Intelligence. So for today, I brought the following landscape overview. On the right-hand side, you can see the cluster that you will use for your production system or where your SAP Data Intelligence will run on. At the very bottom, we have a SLAS operating system. Then we have an RKE2 as a Kubernetes distribution. We will install a Longhorn for the disk space, and then we will have a data intelligence installation on top of that. On the left-hand side, we'll have the provisioning cluster, which will be a Harvester instance, an RKE2, and a SUSE Rancher. And what it will do then is the Harvester will deploy the VMs holding the SLAS. The SUSE Rancher will deploy the RKE, and from there, from the Rancher, we will also deploy the Longhorn part via the marketplace. And first, let's have a deeper look on the left-hand side. So how to install the Harvester and the SUSE Rancher and what are their requirements. So first off, talking about the Harvester requirements. If you would like to have a Harvester cluster, the minimum requirement for it is having a machine with 32 gigabytes of RAM and 8 CPUs and a disk with at least 140 gigabytes. To mention here is that the required IOPS are higher than 5,000 for the disk. That's a requirement Harvester gives us. And we recommend having 3 nodes. So we have a HA setup. So in case one of your node goes down, you still have an available Harvester cluster. The SUSE rancher requirements are a lot lower. You will have, again, 3 machines in this setup as a master and worker node or control plane node for each machine. So, and you have 3 nodes with 8 gigabytes of RAM and 2 CPUs each, as well as 100 gigabyte disk space. Then the SAP Data Intelligence 3 requirements. You will need a workstation from where you control the cluster and roll out stuff. And this will have 16 gigabytes of RAM and 4 CPUs and at least 100 gigabyte of disk space. Then we'll have 4 Kubernetes master nodes, each with 16 gigabytes of RAM and 4 CPUs and 120 gigabytes of disk space, as well as 4 worker nodes with 64 gigabytes of RAM and 16 CPUs and 120 gigabytes of disk space. You will also need a private Docker registry for the deployment of SAP Data Intelligence, which will at least have 16 gigabytes of RAM and 2 CPUs and 90 gigabytes of disk space. Sorry. Yeah, and in summary, you will need just for the data intelligence part, 336 gigabytes of RAM and 82 CPUs, as well as slightly above 1 terabyte of disk space. And if you want to use it with Harvester, of course, you have to summarize that with the Harvester requirements, which means in the end you will need 432 gigabytes of RAM and 106 CPUs with around 1.5 terabytes of disk space. Installing Harvester is quite easy. You have 3 options. Either you mount ISO, use a ESB, or a Pixie boot. And let's say just you mounted an ISO image and you want to install Harvester. On the right-hand side, you can see the setup and what it's supposed to look like. When you mounted your ISO, you will get to that setup, and there you configure your cluster, join the nodes if you have the second and third instance, define the host names, the networks, etc. If you want to have a closer look at this, there's a link to the Harvester documentation, so check it out. Once you have your Harvester set up, you can create virtual machines. Therefore, you enter the specifications like the number of machines you need, the RAM and CPU, the network, which disks to mount, which image to use and template. You can, of course, set up one VM and use it as a template and then reuse it for all the machines in your DI cluster. That will lower your amount of work. And if you do so, you definitely need the required packages of Cloud Init, IP tables, AppArmor, and OpenISCSI. OpenISCSI comes from the Longhorn part, and it's required to install Longhorn. And if you then prepare your SUSE Rancher installation, it's quite easy. There are multiple options. For example, you first install Helm, then you have the curl command right at the top left-hand side. And then you can install your RKE as well with the curl command and make sure you enable the RK2 server node. To verify if the cluster is functional, there's a command that will be rolled out as well. And you can use the kube control and the kube config that's preset just to check if the nodes are there. And when you're using an HA setup, make sure to adjust the etc rancher RKE config YAML. On the master node, it looks like on the right-hand side, you just have a token and TLS SAN. On all other nodes, you need to enter the server, so your first node, so the other instances can join. The SUSE Rancher installation then is like you just add the Helm repository, you create a namespace, and then deploy the Rancher Helm chart. Make sure you set the host name correctly, because this will be the one address where you later on enter or have access to your cluster. Yeah, and then you have your Harvester ready and you have your Rancher ready. Then you will need to connect the Harvester with the SUSE Rancher instance. You can do that from the Rancher part under the virtualization management. option, and then you can say import existing. From there on, you will get some instructions where to go to the harvester and where you can find the cluster registration URL. You will just copy it to the rancher, say, I think it's deploy, and then the two instances will connect. So you can create harvester clusters from rancher. Okay, now we have the left-hand side of our landscape. Let's take a closer look on the right-hand side, so your real workload cluster. The installation order for SAP Data Intelligence is the following. First off, you will create and deploy your Linux workstation with a Kubernetes client, a Docker, and SAP SLC bridge. You will then take care of the RK2 cluster and the storage cluster, and in our part, it's Longhorn. And then we'll make sure you have a private Docker registry. And once all these steps are done, we can take the installation of SAP Data Intelligence. So first step, set up the workstation. You can install any operating system. We recommend OpenSUSE Leap, Tumbleweed, or SLES. Theoretically, you could also use other Linux operating systems as well as macOS. And then what you need on the workstation is a Kubernetes client. And if you want to use this setup as a template for the other machines, we recommend installing Cloud Init. So once done, you will install your RK2 cluster. Therefore, you need to spin up the nodes. And then you can install RK2 using the SUSE rancher. And you can create a harvester cluster like shown on the right-hand side in the video. You will define your pools like the control plane nodes and the worker nodes. Say how many nodes you need, how many CPUs, the RAM, etc. And then you can set up your whole cluster. It's very important that you will need the packages of IP tables and AppArmor to get ahead with the installation. And once you have set up all the cluster and all machines are ready, make sure to copy the kubeconfig to your workstation so we can access it later on with kubecontrol as well. Next steps would be to install Longhorn. The most easy option is, like shown in the video on the right-hand side, to go to the marketplace in your rancher instance and just select Longhorn, install, and then configure it as needed. For the most of the installations, you probably just take the default installation. It will run through, and then you have your Longhorn deployed. You can also check your environment before running a kubecontrol command to install Longhorn. That works as well. Therefore, we have a command like here shown on the left-hand side, curl, and then there's a bash script that can be executed to check if your environment is ready for Longhorn. And then you could also just run a kubecontrol apply to deploy Longhorn. And as well, another option is to use Helm repository can be added as well to your machine, and then you can run Helm install. But the most convenient way is doing it via the rancher as well, because you will get a menu in your rancher instance to access the Longhorn UI directly after installing it. If you do it using kubecontrol or Helm, you will need to set up a service and need to configure a little bit more. Okay, so now you have your machines ready, you have a SLES installed, you have Kubernetes on your machines, and you have Longhorn, so the storage is ready. And then you need a private Docker registry. For that, you can install any registry of your choice, for example, Harbor, or there's a SUSE project, the SUSE private registry, which is based on Harbor. You can check out the documentation right here. As I said, it's required for the installation of SAP Data Intelligence, and you will see in a moment why. But before we go there, let's talk about how you can install Data Intelligence. Therefore, you need to go to the SAP Maintenance Planner and Software Lifecycle plugin, and you would then say you want to plan a new system. You will run the SAP SLC bridge installer on your workstation. You follow the instructions. Afterwards, you will check the node port where you can access the SLC bridge. And from there on, you go to the UI and follow the instructions there. You will trigger the installation and everything is guided within that setup. And what will happen then is the following. Your data intelligence installer, which is the SLC bridge, will pull images from the SAP container registry and push them to your private Docker registry. That's why you need one. In the next step, the SLC bridge will deploy the SAP Data Intelligence components to the RKE cluster, and this one will pull the images again from your private Docker registry. As well, the SLC bridge or the Data Intelligence installer will provision the persistent volumes needed. And in the end, if that's done, if all installations are taken, the SLC bridge will as well validate the Data Intelligence installation. And once that is done, have a lot of fun with your Data Intelligence installation. You can access it and go ahead with it. If you need further information, we got the resources here. I highly recommend our best practice guide for installing SAP Data Intelligence on SUSE Kubernetes stack. And if you have any questions, reach out to us. And yeah, thank you very much for listening. Take care. Bye.